My topic is something which at some point will, at different times and in various ways, affect each and every one of us personally. Aging, dependency, and death. One of our Tea and Talk members talked about the joys of old age. Think tongue-in-cheek. It was a reference to the decreasing abilities of our physical bodies, among them hearing, sight, lack of energy, less flexibility, frailty, even bodily pain. Add to that a possible loss of purpose in life with no specific objectives left to us, no longer in work or part of a social group, a sense of who am I and what am I here for? Perhaps even coping with bereavement after the death of a much-loved partner. And then comes the fear of losing one's independence, becoming vulnerable, not being able to be self-sufficient, having to rely on others, or perhaps of developing dementia. And always a yearning for past pleasures, some joys. And yet within all that, we are still the same person we've always been. And we're constantly reminded that God loves us for what we are, not for what we can do. And there are positives. Time is a great one. Time to reflect on life, to see where things fit in and how we got to be where we are now, and to see our continuing worth through that. Time to establish new relationships, new activities, take up golf perhaps. Time to at least ponder on all that we meant to do. A lovely quote I came across: the less the body works, the more you appreciate any bit that still does. And because we're older, we can more readily admit to our failings, to having senior moments, or blonde moments, as the late Terry Wogan would call them. But then we come to the perception of older age by society at large. A state to be, among other things, pitied, belittled, ridiculed sometimes, thought of as decrepit, which I gather is an old word meaning rattle and creak. Not the most delightful of pictures. And there are those who rail against this, challenging nature by spending vast sums on attempting to retain their youth, encouraged by the cosmetic industries. Reducing signs of sagging, aging skin with potions and surgery, disguising grey hair, driven by the desire to look younger and live longer, possibly out of fear for what happens next, although without apparent thought of the consequence of living longer. Of course, I think all of us, and I count myself in this group, would agree that aging's not for sissies. One has to learn to accept oneself as we're becoming and be content with that state. To realise and live within one's physical and mental limitations and find new ways to achieve objectives. And that's not easy. I'm sure we all like to push the boundaries and even have the odd man moment perhaps. Perhaps we can't walk far. Well, we could get a buggy or an electric cycle. And of course, it's not a time that's static. We are living with constant changes and so having to adapt continually. The Corinthians reading tells us that despite our afflictions, our inner nature is being revised daily, preparing us for what is to come, enabling us to bear those troublesome tribulations. So we're encouraged to face this with positivity, being prepared for what might come, our possible changes in needs. Denying reality will get us nowhere. except that, as Proverbs 16:31 says, grey hair is a crown of splendour. It is attained in the way of righteousness. It does, however, behove us to do what we can to slow down the process. Keep oneself mentally alert, physically active, have a healthy lifestyle in as much as we can. And so we still can have hope and still take pleasure in things and people and places. A wonderful quote from a paraplegic man. I have the choice to be angry with God for what I don't have or can't do, or to be thankful for what I do have. A beautiful sentiment for us all at whatever stage of life we're at. But the reality is that at some point there will be increasingly things that we can no longer do for ourselves. Then we have to accept, hopefully with grace, assistance from others. Welcome that support by revising our personal expectations, trying not to take out our frustrations on those trying to help. In time, that may turn to total dependency. As Jesus reminded Peter in our gospel reading, when you grow old, someone else will fasten a belt around you and take you to where you do not wish to go. We are constantly being reminded that this silver society is increasing in number and in its percentage of the population. Yet the facilities and the support mechanisms needed are woefully inadequate, and many are struggling to find the help they need. Often in our churches too, the older generations are the ones who tend to be left behind. Those who've been faithful worshippers throughout their lives, yet through frailty are no longer able to attend service and events. Some of you will have noticed my Anna Chaplaincy lanyard, an initiative through which we're seeking to reach this group of people by meeting them in the places they are, in the residential homes, in their own homes, and if possible, gathering them together in a warm and friendly environment, providing both spiritual support and social engagement. And throughout our lives, we're reminded that in the word of Ecclesiastes, for everything there is a season, and a time for every matter under heaven, a time to be born and a time to die. As flesh and blood, we are all born and will at some point end our earthly lives. And during those lives, we may have to cope with the death of those we love, family members, friends, sometimes partners, coming to terms, if we're able, and with the support of our families, friends and neighbours, to life without them. But as we grow older, we begin to anticipate our own death. Some are very organised and have their earthly affairs well sorted in an attempt to save families the tasks. Others have good intentions but don't quite achieve that. But how do we within ourselves prepare for the inevitable? As Christians, we are encouraged to look forward with anticipation, to have confidence in the hope of a life beyond. A few weeks ago, we heard of the two older people who met with the Holy Family in the temple, the two who instantly recognized the child as the promised Messiah, Anna and Simeon. And the reaction of Simeon provided us with words used at many funerals today. Master, now you are dismissing your servant in peace, according to your word. For my eyes have seen your salvation, which you have prepared in the presence of all people, a light for revelation to the Gentiles, and for the glory of your people Israel. The culmination of a life in which he, Simeon, felt that God had given him all he wished for, and now he was ready to die. I think for all of us, that example of acknowledging our time has come and accepting death positively and with thanksgiving is a great model. And we who are Christians have an advantage over others during this time of our lives. We have a constant companion on that journey who meets us in our prayers, formal and informal, who promised through Elijah, "Even to your old age and grey hairs, I am he. I am he who will sustain you. I have made you, and I will carry you. I will sustain you, and I will rescue you." And who has assured us through the example shown by his Son that death is not to be feared, but to be anticipated with joy. I finish with a version of Psalm 23 written as a prayer of comfort for someone living with dementia, but appropriate to us all. The Lord